part 2 of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. We got blipped off just when I was saying, beware my death stare, which was my commentary on the Eye of Sauron, where it said, and the malice of the Eye of Sauron, few even of the great among elves and men could endure. That's where we got blipped off. It's a bit of a message in that for us, isn't it? Bing, bang, boom, cut off just at that moment. So I took the opportunity while we were breaking up, mayday, mayday, going down, to bring the birds in, because I decided it's too hot out there and the winds come up, and I just thought I'll just bring them back in and they can fly about in their room and have a bit of freedom before, it's sort of our routine now. They fly free for a couple of hours and then I put them to bed when the sun goes down. So we're all in our little routine now, the birds and I. We're living peacefully and contentedly at Sacred Space Titania's realm. I just wish I didn't feel so unwell at the moment, but it is what it is. Anyway, the time is currently 3:27 p.m. and it's still the 11th of October 2025, Saturday, or Shabbat Shalom, to those of you who observe and practice and the Abrahamic traditions of resting on the Sabbath. Right. I did have a bit of a rest for most of the morning though, and I didn't go dancing last night. I wanted to. I went into the bathroom, went to start putting on, I use witch hazel to tone my skin before I put on moisturiser and foundation. Actually got out the witch hazel and the pad for the toner, and I looked in the mirror and my eyes were ringed with red and I looked terrible, and I went, that's it, girlfriend, you're going to stay home tonight and you're going to rest. And I actually went to bed about 10:30, so I really was exhausted. So there is that. And I'm not sure why I've hit the wall. It's a bit odd. Hit the wall with my sleep apnea as well, but hopefully when I get the new mask, when that arrives, probably in 1 to 2 weeks, I'll start to feel a bit better, but it's going to be a bit of a hard slog for the next week, I think. Well, it is what it is. Now Sauron prepared war against the Eldar and the men of Westerness, and the fires of the mountain were wakened again. Wherefore, seeing the smoke of Orodruin from afar, and perceiving that Sauron had returned, the Númenóreans named that mountain anew Amon Amath, which is Mount Doom. And Sauron gathered to him great strength of his servants out of the east and the south, and among them were not a few of the high race of Númenor. For in the days of the sojourn of Sauron in that land, the hearts of well nigh all its people had been turned towards darkness. Therefore, many of those who sailed east in that time and made fortresses and dwellings upon the coasts were already bent to his will, and they served him still gladly in Middle-earth. But because of the power of Gil-galad, these renegades, lords both mighty and evil, for the most part took up their abodes in the southlands far away. Yet two there were, Herumor and Funor, who rose to power among the Haradrim, a great and cruel people that dwelt in the wide lands south of Mordor, beyond the mouths of Undune. When therefore Sauron saw his time, he came with great force against the new realm of Gondor, and he took Minas Ithil, and he destroyed the white tree of Isildur that grew there. But Isildur escaped, and taking with him a seedling of the tree, he went with his wife and his sons by ship down the river, and they sailed from the mouths of Undune, seeking Elendil. Meanwhile, Anarion held Osgiliath against the enemy, and for that time drove him back to the mountains. But Sauron gathered his strength again, and Anarion knew that unless help should come, his kingdom would not long stand. Now Elendil and Gil-galad took counsel together, for they perceived that Sauron would grow too strong and would overcome all his enemies one by one if they did not unite against him. Therefore they made that league which is called the Last Alliance, and they marched east into Middle-earth, gathering a great host of elves and men, and they halted for a while at Imladris. It is said that the host that was there assembled was fairer and more splendid in arms than any that has since been seen in Middle-earth, and none greater has been mustered since the host of the Valar went against Thangorodrim. From Imladris they crossed the misty mountains by many passes and marched down the river Undune, and so came at last upon the host of Sauron on Dagorlad, the battle plain, which lies before the gate of the Black Land. All living things were divided in that day, and some of every kind, even of beasts and birds, were found in either host, save the elves only. They alone were undivided and followed Gil-galad. Of the dwarves, few fought upon either side, but the kindred of Durin of Moria fought against Sauron. The host of Gil-galad and Elendil had the victory, for the might of the elves was still great in those days, and the Númenóreans were strong and tall and terrible in their wrath. Against Aiglos, the spear of Gil-galad, none could stand, and the sword of Elendil filled orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and of the moon, and it was named Narsil. Then Gil-galad and Elendil passed into Mordor and encompassed the stronghold of Sauron, and they laid siege to it for 7 years, and suffered grievous loss by fire, and by the darts and bolts of the enemy, and Sauron sent many sorties against them. There, in the valley of Gorgoroth, Anarion, son of Elendil, was slain, and many others. But at the last, the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain. And the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Nazil, Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron, and took it for his own. Then Sauron was for that time vanquished, and he forsook his body, and his spirit fled far away and hid in waste places, and he took no visible shape again for many long years. And then he invaded the hearts and minds and souls of modern day contemporary scientists, and they did gain a function, and they created COVID. That's what happens when you leave evil to lay waste and look away and don't notice what they're doing, because it's easier and more convenient and prosperous. Genociders. Thus began, back to the story, but there are parallels, aren't there? Many, many parallels. Thus began the third age of the world after the eldest days and the black years, and there was still hope in that time, and the memory of mirth. And for long the white tree of the Eldar flowered in the courts of the kings of men. For the seedling which he had saved, Isildur planted in the citadel of Arnor in memory of his brother ere he departed from Gondor. The servants of Sauron were routed and dispersed, yet they were not wholly destroyed. And though many men turned now from evil and became subject to the heirs of Elendil, yet many more remembered Sauron in their hearts and hated the kingdoms of the west. The dark tower was levelled to the ground, yet its foundations remained and was not forgotten. The Númenóreans indeed set a guard upon the land of Mordor, for none dared dwell there because of the terror of the memory of Sauron, and because of the mountain of fire that stood nigh to Barad-dûr, and the valley of Gorgoroth was filled with ash. An active volcano, you understand. Many of the elves and many of the Númenóreans, and of men who were their allies, had perished in the battle and the siege, and Elendil the tall and Gil-galad the high king were no more. Never again was such a host assembled, nor was there any such league of elves and men, for after Elendil's day, the two kindreds became estranged. The ruling ring passed out of the knowledge even of the wise in that age, yet it was not unmade, for Isildur would not surrender it to Elrond and Círdan, who stood by. They counselled him to cast it into the fire of Orodrun nigh at hand, in which it had been forged, so that it should perish, and the power of Sauron be for ever diminished, and he should remain only as a shadow of malice in the wilderness. But Isildur refused this counsel, saying, "This I will have as a wergild for my father's death and my brother's. Was it not I that dealt the enemy his death blow?" And the ring that he held seemed to him exceedingly fair to look upon, and he would not suffer it to be destroyed. Taking it, therefore, he returned at first to Minas Anor, and there planted the white tree in memory of his brother Anarion. But soon he departed, and after he had given counsel to Meneldiel his brother's son, and had committed to him the realm of the south, he bore away the ring to be an heirloom of his house, and marched north from Gondor by the way that Elendil had come. And he forsook the south kingdom, for he purposed to take up his father's realm in Eriador, far from the shadow of the Black Land. Nice fresh start. Somewhere pretty and nostalgic and wholesome. I get it. I do. But Isildur was overwhelmed by a host of orcs that lay in wait in the misty mountains, and they descended upon him at unawares in his camp between the green wood and the great river, nigh to Lurg Ningloron, the Gladden fields. For he was heedless, and set no guard, deeming that all his foes were overthrown. There well nigh all his people were slain, and among them were his 3 elder sons, Elendur, Arotan, and Cirion. But his wife and his youngest son, Valandil, he had left in Imladris when he went to the war. Isildur himself escaped by means of the ring, for when he wore it, he was invisible to all eyes. But the orcs hunted him by scent and slot until he came to the river and plunged in. There the ring betrayed him and avenged its maker, for it slipped from his finger as he swam, and it was lost in the water. Then the orcs saw him as he laboured in the stream, and they shot him with many arrows, and that was his end. Only 3 of his people came ever back over the mountains after long wandering, and of these one was Otar, his esquire, to whose keeping he had given the shards of the sword of Elendil. Thus Narsil came in due time to the hand of Valandil, Isildur's heir, in Imladris, but the blade was broken and its light was extinguished, and it was not forged anew. You see, even objects have their fate or destiny. And Master Elrond foretold that this would not be done until the ruling ring should be found again and Sauron should return. But the hope of elves and men was that these things might never come to pass. Valandil took up his abode in Annúminas, for his folk were diminished, and of the Númenóreans, and of the men of Eriador, there remained now too few to people the land, or to maintain all the places that Elendil had built in Dagorlad and in Mordor, and upon the Gladden fields. Many had fallen. And it came to pass, after the days of Eärendil, the seventh king that followed Valandil, that the men of Westernesse, the Dunedain of the north, became divided into petty realms and lordships, and their foes devoured them one by one. Ever they dwindled with the years, until their glory passed, leaving only green mounds in the grass. At length, naught was left of them but a strange people, wandering secretly in the wild. And other men knew not their homes, nor the purpose of their journeys. And save in Imladris, in the house of Elrond, their ancestry was forgotten. Yet the shards of the sword were cherished during many lives of men by the heirs of Isildur, and their line, from father to son, remained unbroken. In the south, the realm of Gondor endured, and for a time its splendour grew, until it recalled the wealth and majesty of Númenor ere it fell. High towers the people of Gondor built, and strong places, and havens of many ships, and the winged crown of the kings of men was held in awe by people of many lands and tongues. For many a year the white tree grew before the king's house in Minas Anor, the seed of that tree which Isildur brought out of the deeps of the sea from Númenor, and the seed before that came from Avaloni, and before that from Valinor, in the day before days, when the world was young. Yet, at the last, in the wearing of the swift years of Middle-earth, Gondor waned, and the line of Meneldir, son of Anarion, failed, for the blood of the Númenóreans became much mingled with that of other men, and their power and wisdom was diminished, and their lifespan was shortened, and the watch upon Mordor slumbered. And in the days of Talimnar, the 3rd and 20th of the line of Meneldir, a plague came upon dark winds out of the west. Dark winds out of the east. And it smote the king and his children, and many of the people of Gondor perished. Then the forts on the borders of Mordor were deserted, and Minas Ithil was emptied of its people, and evil entered again into the black land secretly, and the ashes of Gorgoroth were stirred as by a cold wind, for dark shapes gathered there. It is said that these were indeed the Ulairi whom Sauron called the Nazgûl, the 9 ring wraiths that had long remained hidden, but returned now to prepare the ways of their master, for he had begun to grow again. And in the days of Eärnil they made their first stroke, and they came by night out of Mordor over the passes of the mountains of shadow, and took Minas Ithil for their abode, and they made it a place of such dread that none dared to look upon it. Thereafter it was called Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery, and Minas Morgul was ever at war with Minas Anor in the west. Then Osgiliath, which in the waning of the people had long been deserted, became a place of ruins and a city of ghosts. But Minas Anor endured, and it was named anew Minas Tirith, the Tower of God, for there the kings caused to be built in the citadel a white tower, very tall and fair, and its eye was upon many lands. Proud, still, and strong was that city, and in it the white tree still flowered for a while before the house of the kings, and there the remnant of the Númenóreans still defended the passage of the river against the terrors of Minas Morgul and against all the enemies of the west, orcs and monsters and evil men. And thus the lands behind them, west of Undune, were protected from war and destruction. Still, Minas Tirith endured after the days of Eärnur, son of Eärnil, and the last king of Gondor. He it was that rode alone to the gates of Minas Morgul to meet the challenge of the Morgul lord, and he met him in single combat. But he was betrayed by the Nazgûl and taken alive into the city of torment, and no living man saw him ever again. Now Eärnur left no heir, but when the line of the kings failed, the stewards of the house of Mardil the Faithful ruled the city and its ever-shrinking realm, and the Rohirrim, the horsemen of the north, came and dwelt on the green land of Rohan, which before was named Kalinathon, and was a part, I could be wrong, and was a part of the kingdom of Gondor, and the Rohirrim aided the lords of the city in their wars. And northward, beyond the falls of Rauros and the gates of Argonath, there were as yet other defences, powers more ancient, of which men knew little, against whom the things of evil did not dare to move, until in the ripening of time their dark lord Sauron should come forth again. And until that time was come, never again after the days of Eärnil did the Nazgûl dare to cross the river or to come forth from their city in shape visible to men. In all the days of the Third Age, after the fall of Gil-galad, Master Elrond abode in Imladris, and he gathered there many elves and other folk of wisdom and power from among all the kindreds of Middle-earth. And he preserved through many lives of men the memory of all that had been fair, and the house of Elrond was a refuge for the weary and the oppressed, and a treasury of good counsel and wise lore. In that house were harboured the heirs of Isildur in childhood and old age, because of the kinship of their blood with Elrond himself, and because he knew, in his wisdom, that one should come of their line to whom a great part was appointed in the last deeds of that age. And until that time came the shards of Elendil's sword. And until that time came, the shards of Elendil's sword were given into the keeping of Elrond, when the days of the Dunedain darkened, and they became a wandering people. In Eriador, Imladris was the chief dwelling of the high elves, but at the grey havens of Lindon there abode also a remnant of the people of Gil-galad the Elven King. At times they would wander into the lands of Eriador, but for the most part they dwelt near the shores of the sea, building and tending the elven ships wherein those of the firstborn who grew weary of the world set sail into the uttermost west. Círdan the shipwright was lord of the havens and mighty among the wise. Of the 3 rings that the elves had preserved unsullied, no open word was ever spoken among the wise, and few even of the Eldar knew where they were bestowed. Yet, after the fall of Sauron, their power was ever at work, and where they abode there mirth also dwelt, and all things were unstained by the griefs of time. Thereafter, ere the Third Age was ended, the elves perceived that the ring of sapphire was with Elrond, and in the fair valley of Rivendell, upon whose house the stars of heaven most brightly shone, whereas the ring of adamant was in the land of Lorien, where dwelt the Lady Galadriel. A queen she was of the woodland elves, the wife of Celeborn of Doriath, yet she herself was of the Noldor, and remembered the day before days in Valinor. And she was the mightiest and fairest of all the elves that remained in Middle-earth. But the red ring remained hidden until the end, and none save Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan knew to whom it had been committed. Thus it was that, in 2 domains, the bliss and beauty of the elves remained still undiminished while that age endured. In Imladris, in Lothlorien, the hidden land between Celebrant and Undune, where the trees bore flowers of gold, and no orc or evil thing dared ever come. Yet many voices were heard among the elves, foreboding that, if Sauron should come again, then either he would find the ruling ring that was lost, or at the best his enemies would discover it and destroy it. But in either chance, the powers of the three must then fail, and all things maintained by them must fade, and so the elves should pass into the twilight, and the dominion of men begin. And so indeed it has since befallen. The 1 and the 7 and the 9 are destroyed, and the 3 have passed away, and with them the third age is ended, and the tales of the Eldar in Middle-earth draw to their close. Those were the fading years, and in them the last flowering of the elves east of the sea came to its winter. In that time the Noldor walked still in the Hitherlands, mightiest and fairest of the children of the world, and their tongues were still heard by mortal ears. Many things of beauty and wonder remained on earth in that time, and many things also of evil and dread. Orcs there were, and trolls and dragons and fell beasts, and strange creatures, old and wise in the woods, whose names are forgotten. Dwarves still laboured in the hills and wrought with patient craft works of metal and stone that none now can rival. But the dominion of men was preparing, and all things were changing, until at last the Dark Lord arose in Mirkwood again. Now of old, the name of that forest was Greenwood the Great, and its wide halls and aisles were the haunt of many beasts and of birds of bright song. And there was the realm of King Thranduil under the oak and the beech. But after many years, when well nigh a third of that age of the world had passed, a darkness crept slowly through the wood from the southward, and fear walked there in shadowy glades. Fell beasts came hunting, and cruel and evil creatures laid there their snares. Then the name of the forest was changed, and Mirkwood it was called, for the nightshade lay deep there, and few dared to pass through, save only in the north, where Thranduil's people still held the evil at bay. Whence it came few could tell, and it was long ere even the wise could discover it. It was the shadow of Sauron, and the sign of his return. For, coming out of the wastes of the east, he took up his abode in the south of the forest, and slowly he grew and took shape there again. In a dark hill he made his dwelling, and wrought there his sorcery. And all folk feared the sorcerer of Dol Guldur, and yet they knew not at first how great was their peril. Even as the first shadows were felt in Mirkwood, there appeared in the west of Middle-earth the Istari, whom men called the Wizards. None knew at that time whence they were, save Círdan of the Havens, and only to Elrond and to Galadriel did he reveal that they came over the sea. But afterwards it was said among the elves that they were messengers sent by the lords of the west to contest the power of Sauron if he should arise again, and to move elves and men and all living things of goodwill to valiant deeds. In the likeness of men they appeared, old but vigorous, and they changed little with the years, and aged but slowly, though great cares lay on them. Great wisdom they had, and many powers of mind and hand. Long they journeyed, far and wide among elves and men, and held converse also with beasts and with birds. And the peoples of Middle-earth gave to them many names, for their true names they did not reveal. Chief among them were those whom the elves called Mithrandir and Curunir, but men in the north named Gandalf and Saruman. Of these, Curunir was the eldest and came first, and after him came Mithrandir and Radagast, and others of the Istari who went into the east of Middle-earth and do not come into these tales. Radagast was the friend of all beasts and birds, but Curunir went most among men, and he was subtle in speech and skilled in all the devices of smithcraft. Mithrandir was closest in council with Elrond and the elves. He wandered far in the north and west, and made never in any land any lasting abode, but Curunir journeyed into the east, and when he returned, he dwelt at Orthanc in the ring of Isengard, which the Númenóreans made in the days of their power. Ever most vigilant was Mithrandir, and he it was that most doubted the darkness in Mirkwood, for though many deemed that it was wrought by the ring wraiths, he feared that it was indeed the first shadow of Sauron returning. And he went to Dol Guldur, and the sorcerer fled from him, and there was a watchful peace for a long while. But at length the shadow returned, and its power increased, and in that time was first made the Council of the Wise, that is called the White Council, and therein were Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan and other lords of the Eldar, and with them were Mithrandir and Curonir. And Curonir, that was Saruman the White, was chosen to be their chief, for he had most studied the devices of Sauron of old. Galadriel indeed had wished that Mithrandir should be the head of the council, and Saruman begrudged them that, for his pride and desire of mastery was grown great. But Mithrandir refused the office, since he would have no ties and no allegiance, save to those who sent him, and he would abide in no place, nor be subject to any summons. A free and wild and independent wizard he is. I completely comprehend why. But Saruman now began to study the lore of the rings of power, their making and their history. Now the shadow grew ever greater, and the hearts of Elrond and Mithrandir darkened. Therefore, on a time, Mithrandir at great peril went again to Dol Guldur and the pits of the sorcerer, and he discovered the truth of his fears and escaped. And returning to Elrond, he said, "True, alas, is our guess. This is not one of the Ulairi, as many have long supposed. It is Sauron himself, who has taken shape again, and now grows apace, and he is gathering again all the rings to his hand, and he seeks ever for news of the One and of the heirs of Isildur, if they live still on earth." And Elrond answered, "In the hour that Isildur took the ring and would not surrender it, this doom was wrought, that Sauron should return." "Yet the one was lost," said Mithrandir, "and while it still lies hid, we can master the enemy if we gather our strength and tarry not too long." Then the White Council was summoned, and Mithrandir urged them to swift deeds, but Curonir spoke against him and counselled them to wait yet and to watch. For I believe not, said he, that the one will ever be found again in Middle-earth. Into Undune it fell, and long ago I deem it was rolled to the sea. There it shall lie until the end, when all this world is broken and the deeps are removed. Therefore naught was done at that time, though Elrond's heart misgave him, and he said to Mithrandir, Nonetheless, I forebode that the one will yet be found, and then war will arise again, and in that war this age will be ended. Indeed, in a second darkness it will end, unless some strange chance deliver us that my eyes cannot see. Many are the strange chances of the world, said Mithrandir, and help oft shall come from the hands of the weak when the wise falter. Thus the wise were troubled, but none as yet perceived that Curanir had turned to dark thoughts and was already a traitor in heart. For he desired that he and no other should find the great ring, so that he might wield it himself and order all the world to his will. Too long he had studied the ways of Sauron in hope to defeat him, and now he envied him as a rival rather than hated his works. And he deemed that the ring which was Sauron's would seek for its master as he became manifest once more, but if he were driven out again, then it would lie hid. Therefore he was willing to play with peril and let Sauron be for a time, hoping by his craft to forestall both his friends and the enemy when the ring should appear. He set a watch upon the Gladden fields, but soon he discovered that the servants of Dol Guldur were searching all the ways of the river in that region. Then he perceived that Sauron also had learned of the manner of Isildur's end, and he grew afraid and withdrew to Isengard and fortified it. And ever he probed deeper into the lore of the rings of power and the art of their forging. But he spoke of none of this to the council, hoping still that he might be the first to hear news of the ring. And he gathered a great host of spies, and many of these were birds, for Radagast lent him his aid, divining naught of his treachery, and deeming that this was but part of the watch upon the enemy. But ever the shadow in Mirkwood grew deeper, and to Dol Guldur evil things repaired out of all the dark places of the world, and they were united again under one will, and their malice was directed against the elves and the survivors of Númenor. Therefore, at last the council was again summoned, and the lore of the rings was much debated. But Mithrandir spoke to the council, saying, It is not needed that the ring should be found, for while it abides on earth and is not unmade, still the power that it holds will live, and Sauron will grow and have hope. The might of the elves and the elf friends is less now than of old. Soon he will be too strong for you, even without the great ring. I'll read that. For he rules the 9, and of the 7 he has recovered 3. We must strike. To this Curunir now assented, desiring that Sauron should be thrust from Dol Guldur, which was nigh to the river, and should have leisure to search there no longer. Therefore, for the last time, he aided the council, and they put forth their strength, and they assailed Dol Guldur and drove Sauron from his hold, and Mirkwood, for a brief while, was made wholesome again. But their stroke was too late, for the Dark Lord had foreseen it, and he had long prepared all his movements, and the Ulairi, his 9 servants, had gone before him to make ready for his coming. Therefore his flight was but a feint, and he soon returned, and ere the wise could prevent him, he re-entered his kingdom in Mordor and reared once again the dark towers of Barad-dûr. And in that year the White Council met for the last time, and Curunir withdrew to Isengard, and took counsel with none save himself. Orcs were mustering, and far to the east and the south the wild peoples were arming. Then, in the midst of gathering fear and the rumour of war, the foreboding of Elrond was proved true, and the One Ring was indeed found again by a chance more strange than even Mithrandir had foreseen, and it was hidden from Curunir and from Sauron. And we all know, if you were listening to The Hobbit, from whose possession it came to for a long, long age. Is precious. For it had been taken from Undune long ere they sought for it, being found by one of the small fisher folk that dwelt by the river, ere the kings failed in Gondor, and by its finder it was brought beyond search into dark hiding under the roots of the mountains. There it dwelt until even in the year of the assault upon Dol Guldur it was found again by a wayfarer fleeing into the depths of the earth from the pursuit of the orcs, and passed into a far distant country, even to the land of the Periannath, the little people, the halflings, who dwelt in the west of Eriador. And ere that day they had been held of small account by elves and by men, and neither Sauron nor any of the wise save Mithrandir had in all their counsels given thought to them. It's always the little ones you've got to watch out for, people there. Small but mighty. You understand. Now by fortune and his vigilance, Mithrandir first learned of the ring ere Sauron had news of it. Yet he was dismayed and in doubt, for too great was the evil power of this thing for any of the wise to wield, unless, like Curunir, he wished himself to become a tyrant and a dark lord in his turn. But neither could it be concealed from Sauron forever, nor could it be unmade by the craft of the elves. Therefore, with the help of the Dunedain and the North, Mithrandir set a watch upon the land of the Periannath and bided his time. But Sauron had many ears, and soon he heard rumour of the one ring which above all things he desired, and he sent forth the Nazgul to take it. Then war was kindled, and in battle with Sauron, the Third Age ended even as it had begun. But those who saw the things that were done in that time, deeds of valour and wonder, have elsewhere told the tale of the war of the ring, and how it ended both in victory unlooked for and in sorrow long foreseen. Here let it be said that in those days the heir of Isildur arose in the north, and he took the shards of the sword of Elendil, and in Imladris they were reforged. And he went then to war, a great captain of men. He was Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the 39th heir in the right line from Isildur, and yet more like to Elendil than any before him. Battle there was in Rohan, and Curunir the traitor was thrown down, and Isengard broken. And before the city of Gondor, a great field was fought, and the Lord of Morgul, captain of Sauron, there passed into darkness. And the heir of Isildur led the host of the west to the black gates of Mordor. In that last battle were Mithrandir and the sons of Elrond, and the king of Rohan, and lords of Gondor, and the heir of Isildur with the Dunedain of the north. There, at the last, they looked upon death and defeat. And all their valour was in vain, for Sauron was too strong. Yet in that hour was put to the proof that which Mithrandir had spoken, and help came from the hands of the weak when the wise faltered. For as many songs have since sung, it was the Periannath, the little people, dwellers in hillsides and meadows, that brought them deliverance. For Frodo the halfling, it is said, at the bidding of Mithrandir, took on himself the burden, and alone with his servant he passed through peril and darkness, and came at last in Sauron's despite even to Mount Doom, and there into the fire where it was wrought he cast the great ring of power. And so at last it was unmade, and its evil consumed. Then Sauron failed, and he was utterly vanquished, and passed away like a shadow of malice. And the towers of Barad-dûr crumbled in ruin, and at the rumour of their fall many lands trembled. Thus peace came again, and a new spring opened on earth. And the heir of Isildur was crowned King of Gondor and Arnor, and the might of the Dunedain was lifted up, and their glory renewed. In the courts of Minas Anor, the white tree flowered again, for a seedling was found by Mithrandir in the snows of Mindolluin that rose tall and white above the city of Gondor, and while it still grew there, the elder days were not wholly forgotten in the hearts of the kings. Now all these things were achieved, for the most part by the counsel and vigilance of Mithrandir, and in the last few days he was revealed as a lord of great reverence, and clad in white he rode into battle, but not until the time came for him to depart was it known that he had long guarded the red ring of fire. At the first, that ring had been entrusted to Círdan, Lord of the Havens, but he had surrendered it to Mithrandir, and for he knew whence he came, and whither at last he would return. Take now this ring, he said, for thy labours and thy cares will be heavy, but in all it will support thee and defend thee from weariness. For this is the ring of fire, and herewith, maybe, thou shalt rekindle hearts to the valour of old in a world that grows chill. But as for me, my heart is with the sea, and I will dwell by the grey shores, guarding the havens until the last ship sails. Then I will await thee. White was that ship, and long was it a building, and long it awaited the end of which Círdan had spoken. And when all these things were done, and the heir of Isildur had taken up the lordship of men, and the dominion of the west had passed to him, then it was made plain that the power of the three rings also was ended, and to the firstborn the world grew old and grey. Is that like my current reality here in Brisbane, Australia? 5 years post the COVID epoch, still painting their ugly houses grey. Well, their houses wouldn't be ugly if they got over themselves and their bleakness. Ghastly it is. Even the sun shining when it doesn't enliven or enlighten the putrescence. It's probably good that I'm going to die soon, I think. It's good. Don't have to look at that anymore. My only regret is I've denied the sea and my loving family and my tribe, but it is what it is. In that time, the last of the Noldor set sail from the havens and left Middle-earth forever. And latest of all the keepers of the three rings rode to the sea, and Master Elrond took there the ship that Círdan had made ready. In the twilight of autumn it sailed out of Mithlond, until the seas of the bent world fell away beneath it, and the winds of the round sky troubled it no more, and borne upon the high airs above the mists of the world, it passed into the ancient west, and an end was come for the Eldar of story and of song. And thus concludes the Silmarillion, and the next few pages are genealogies, which I'll let you peruse. I won't bother. Can you read it? I won't bother reading it all out to you. I'm exhausted, and maybe I shall. It's a bit hard to see on the screen, isn't it? So from the house of Finwë we have Muriel and Indis of the Vanyar, and from Muriel we have Fëanor, whose children were Maithros, Maglor, Calagon, Caranthir, Curufin, who was the father of Celebrimbor, Amrod, Amras. Through Indis we have Fingolfin and Finarfin, through his wife Eowyn of Aqualondi, and Fingolfin's children were Fingon, Torgon, Aradel, who married Eul, and they begat Maegleen. Torgon's child was Idril Celebrindal, who married Tuor, and they begat Earendil, who married Elwing, and their children were Elrond and Elros, and Fingon begat Gil-galad. The house of Finwë and the Noldoran descent of Elrond and Elros. Of Finarfin and Eowyn begat Finrod, Felagund, Orodreth, Aignor, and their children were Angrod and Galadriel. Orodreth's child was Finduilas. Right. To the descendants of Olwe and Elwe, Olwe of Alqualondi and Elwe Thingol. Elwe married Milian the Maya. Their child was Luthien, who married Beren e Chamion. Their child was Dior, Thingol's heir, who married Nimloth of Doriath, and their daughter was Elwing, who married Earendil, and their children were Elrond and Elros. Tar Minyator, the kings of Numenor, lords of Adunai, kings of Arnor, and chieftains of the Dunedain, and direct descent through the second and third ages until they begat Aragorn, who married Arwen, who was sister to Elrohir and Eladan, the children of Celebrion and Elrond, and Celebrion was born of Galadriel and Celeborn of Doriath. And Finarfin's children, as mentioned here before, were Finrod Felagund, Orodreth, Angrod, Aegnor, and Galadriel. So, then we have the ancestry of Beor the Old, which comes down to Bregor, who was the father of Barahir and Bregolas. Barahir married Emodir, and together they begat Beren and Chamion, who married Luthien, and Bregolas begat Belagund and Baragund. Belagund begat Rian, who married Huor, and their child was Tuor, who married Idril Celebrindal, and their child was Earendil, who married Elwing, and again their children were Elrond and Elros. Elwing's parents were Dior and Nimloth. Dior was Thingol's heir. Dior was the daughter or son, I can't remember which gender they were. Anyway, of Luthien and Beren and Chamion. Must have been the heir, it must have been male. Right, Baragund's offspring was Morwen Elethwen, who married Hurin, and their children were Turin, Turambar, Nienor, Nieniel. That was the house of Beor and the mortal descent of Elrond and Elros. On one line they were still related to the Valar by the Elvish line. Then the house of Hador of Dor Lamen, we have Marach down to Hador or Lorindol. Their children were Gundor, Galdor, and Glorithel. Galdor married Hareth of the Haladin. Glorithel married Haldir. Haldir was the child of Halmir, and the siblings were Hareth, who married Galdor of Dor Lamen. Hareth and Galdor's children were Hurin and Huor. Haldir and Glorithel's child was Hundir, down to Brundir the Lane. Galdor and Hareth of the Haladin's children were Hurin and Huor. Huor married Rian. Their child was Tuor, who married Idril Celebrindal, and their son was Earendil. Morwen married Hurin, the brother of Huor, and their children were Turin Turambar and Nianor Niniel. Then the next one was the sundering of the elves and some of the names given to their divisions. Quendi, the elves. So we had the Eldar, elves of the great journey from Cuvienen. And then they were split into 3 factions, the Vanyar, Nordor and Teleri. The Vanyar all went to Aman, the Noldor all went to Aman, and the Teleri, those that went to Aman, all their descendants became the Calaquendi, elves of the light, high elves. They came to Aman in the days of the 2 trees. Of the Teleri, there were those that remained in Beleriand, and they became Sundar, grey elves. Those that left the march of the Teleri east of the Misty Mountains became the Nandor, and of whom some afterwards entered Beleriand, and later Lyquendi, green elves of Assyriand, and they became Umanyar, the Eldar who were not of Aman, and later aligned with the Avari, the unwilling elves who refused the great journey. They became the Moriquendi, elves of the darkness. They never saw the light of the trees. And then we have notes on pronunciation, which from time to time I still manage to stuff up, people of Earth. And then we have a very, very long index, which I shall not read or trouble with, but if you wish to peruse it, borrow the book from the library, or if you're like me, like to own your own books, which is a very sensible thing to do, given you don't know when the internet might someday crash and we lose everything, and all we'll have is paper books made with real paper and real trees, which is kind of a relic and a beauty of its own, even though this one smells very much of its age. When I bought it, I was still a young girl, still bearing my father's name, Phillips, and I got married when I was 19 and 1 month and 8 days, so I must have bought this book when I was 17 or 18. So there you have it, my beautiful people of planet Earth. It's been a journey, there's been lots of segues, there's been lots of armchair travelling, there's been lots of interdimensionality, there's been joy, there's been tears, there's been the occasional ranting of wrath on my part when I think about all the evils that have been done to me up to current time. And sometimes it's lovely to immerse yourself in fantasy worlds, because therein lies great teachings on how certain rules of engagement exist, and how great evil and great good are forever clutching each other's heels, wrestling with each other, including within our own body, mind, spirits and souls. And to gain mastery, you have to choose a path and gain mastery in that. But I recommend, where at all possible, choose the light of the trees represented by the white tree. Only because I'm very partial to trees, you understand, and birds and beasts of all kinds, and find them far preferable to most other mortals, just saying. But there it is. Have a beautiful rest of your Saturday. Enjoy your afternoon and evening. It is currently 4:51 p.m. I need a cup of tea and I'm going to hang out with my birdie boys a bit before it's birdie num sleepy by time. And I might take myself back to bed because I feel like hell today. I honestly don't know what's wrong with me except that I'm not breathing in my sleep and my upper shoulder hurts and I have very bad pains in my hands, arthritic pains, and I'm just a bit of a fucking mess at the moment. But it goes like that. I overachieve and I overwork myself on various little projects. I did a lot of work last week in the garden. It was probably too much for me. I kid myself that I can do these things, but it's actually too much. I always crash and burn afterwards. It's a great shame, but it's just the way I've always been and existed in this world. I have only very limited energy reserves, and that's why I get really distressed when my energy is dishonoured and disrespected and desecrated by evil bastards, because it's a finite source and I don't always have a great deal of it to call back into my being. And if I get too depleted, then I do the zombie death walk again. I've been trying to avoid that, people of Earth. I've been trying to fully, blow life back into myself and create a new paradigm for myself. I don't know if that is still yet possible. But I've been wrong before. I've outlived many near deaths, so there is that. My little boy is singing. Can you hear him? Bo! Bo, he's singing! He's singing. So, Goddess bless as always, from the Ein Sof or down to Malkut, channeled through the Divine Feminine, the Shekhinah. Let there be peace in all worlds. Amen. V'Salah.